Assalamu alaikum. Do you have earbuds or anything or something Bluetooth?
Oh, yeah. You can turn off one. Oh, wait. You need my Bluetooth, right? You need it on? Okay. Turn it on.
I'll try to see it. I'm sorry. Assalamu alaikum.
Turn it on.
Okay, well, you got like 40 videos saying something. So,
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we're in the middle of Surah Al-Fatiha. We talked about the Basmala, the Ta'awudh Basmala, then praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking about his attributes of mercy and about Yawmuddin. He is the owner of Yawmuddin. Then we reach the center of Surah Al-Fatiha. So Surah Al-Fatiha, as we know, 7 ayahs, and the center is a dua. In the beginning, we start with praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking about his attributes. Hope and fear is there in the first few ayahs, and then the center is the dua. And the dua is from verse number 5 till the end. And that is, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. After this is the dua, إِهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمَ. So this is now a declaration of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the end, when we wrap up Surah Al-Fatiha, I'll explain how it is the ideal dua. Surah Al-Fatiha is the ideal dua, and it teaches us how to make dua. And that's why in the very beginning, when we talked about the various names of Surah Al-Fatiha, one of it is also Surah Ta'lim al-Mas'ala, the surah which teaches you how to ask. Some have called Surah Al-Fatiha this name. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Fatiha is also quoting the ideal slave, but also teaching us how to make dua. It's a dua, but it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually quoting a ideal servant. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, meaning He Himself is not going to direct that to Himself, that I worship you and I seek your help. He's quoting an ideal slave. It's not that someone actually said this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching humanity how to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and talk to Him. So notice that the dua is actually right at the end. It comes after so much. So this also teaches us that when we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we raise our hands, there's a certain etiquette that should be observed. We have etiquettes with so many different people, and when you go to work, there's a certain etiquette, there's a certain code of conduct. There is at school as well. There's every place, and even in the masjid, there's a code of conduct. Our attire, our appearance, our voice level, etc. All of these are necessary. Then why not with the creator of the universe? All the more he should have the utmost respect that we direct towards him and the most etiquette. So this actually teaches us etiquette. You start with praise. You are aware that he is merciful, but then you are also fearful. And then you lead to up to our relationship with Allah. And that's what this verse number 5 is, that only you do we worship and only you do we ask for help. In Arabic, you could say na'buduka, which means we worship you. Na'buduka in Arabic means we worship you. And if you take the ka means you in Arabic. Ka means you. And there's various other ways you can say you. But in this situation, na'budu means we worship, ka means you. Now, if you were to take the ka and put it in the front, you can't say ka na'budu. It doesn't make sense. You would have to say iyyaka na'budu. So in Arabic, when you do this, it actually belongs after the na'budu. Na'budu ka. But if you take that ka and you put it in the front, then it gives the meaning of only Allah. And that's why in the translation it says, only you do we worship, because the ka has been brought in the front with the iyyaka. And it's done twice. Iyyaka na'budu and iyyaka nasta'een. So in this ayah, we are saying, oh Allah, you're the only one we worship. So we don't worship anyone else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Directing an act of worship, this type of adoration, to anyone other than Allah is known as shirk. This is to associate a partner with Allah, even if you don't think that thing being deserving of worship like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you are in fact worshipping it because of some aspect within it, that would also be shirk. So like, let's say someone, when they worshipped idols, the mushrikeen, they knew that these idols were nothing like Allah. They believed in Allah. Mushrikeen in Mecca, they believed in Allah. But they also believed in demigods, miniature gods. And these miniature gods, like maybe in Hinduism, where they believe that they have certain allocated powers, or they have the capability to sometimes intercede with Allah and kind of bypass Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's judgment. Like in minister, for instance, you have a king. If you can get close to a minister of the king, then he can sometimes, the king would have said no to you, but this guy's so close that he can alter that decision. So he has some sort of authority. So they believe this about the idols, and they would worship the idols because of that. This is shirk, because you are taking away from what belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and directing it towards idols. Now, I don't want to go too deeper into this. There's some other aspects in this regard where some people, they ask other people, but they don't have the belief that they are capable of anything. Is that shirk or not? We're not going to talk about that. But it's best to avoid any kind of dua or ibadah towards anything other than Allah. True tawheed, we only consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our du'as and our acts of worship. So here Imam Ibn Kathir, he mentions what is ibadah. Literally in the Arabic language, ibadah, he says, means dhul. Dhul is humility, lowering oneself. So ibadah actually means to lower yourself, to put yourself in a state of humiliation before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a friend of mine said very beautifully, he quoted his sibling who said that we bow before one so we can avoid bowing before millions. So no matter what, you will have to bow before someone. And we choose to bow before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and humiliate ourselves before Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the barakah of that humiliation that we put ourselves through, will give us power and will give us strength against everyone else. And that is why we don't even bow our heads before other people. In certain cultures, you bow. Muslims avoid bowing. And in I believe Japanese culture, they actually do sujood. Even, I don't know if they still do it today, but like in the old cartoons and movies and stuff like that, samurais and stuff like that, they'll bow. And they even do a very, actually, the form of bowing is sometimes better than us. They have the elbows out and they do it properly. When we bow, we're like this. Actually, we're supposed to bow like that. I mean, do sujood with the elbows outward. Not when you're in jama'ah though. So this is found in many cultures. So they bow before so many different people. Everyone they meet, they're bowing before them. And we decide that we're going to bow before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is not only for the physical, but it's also for the metaphysical and spiritual. If you spiritually bow and do sujood and prostrate before Allah, you will be absolved of doing that to the creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will gift you with such a tawakkul and trust in Allah that you will not fear anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This creates a level of self-confidence and the capability of not bowing before anyone else spiritually. The world is spiritually bowing before so many people. We're afraid of these people so that we don't say what we want to say before them. And that's a type of humiliation. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one hadith, he tells the believers that there will come a time where the disbelievers will come. They'll be able to pick you up and snatch you away from the ummah, basically kill you or consume you, just the way people eat food. You decide which morsel you want, you take that, there's no one to stop you. So the Sahaba asked, is it because we're going to be very few? Because at that time the Sahaba were very few, and they noticed that we're weak because we're low in number. The mushrikeen are able to harm us and we can't do anything. So Rasulullah ﷺ says the opposite, the contrary. You're going to be a great amount, billions perhaps, and that's where we find ourselves. It's kind of like ironic. There's billions, like a billion Muslims that can't do anything. It's literally what he said in the hadith. And the enemies will come, be able to pick you up. They'll make some silly excuse. People will buy it because they're scared, not because it makes sense. And you won't be able to do anything. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, you'll be great, but the reason is because you will fear death, and then you'll follow and love the dunya. So because we bow before the dunya spiritually, we are unable to have this quwwah in our spirituality. This is what Surah Al-Fatiha is actually teaching us, that are we really true to this statement? This is like a promise that we're making to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a statement in the form of a promise. And this is the ideal believer. He actually does this. He only worships Allah and he only asks Allah for help. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us, that we have to do this. And Imam Ibn Kathir, he says that ibadah is humiliation, is dhul. And it is also said, طَرِيقٌ مُعَبَّدٌ وَبَعِيرٌ مُعَبَّدٌ أي مُذَلَّل. So you will say this word ibadah for a road. You'll say tariq mu'abbad when it's flat. The tariq means road, and you'll use the word ibadah for the road to mean it's flat. So the word ibadah means to flatten yourself out of humility. Imagine spiritually you're flattening yourself out. And that is why many who discuss the secrets of Sharia, Imam Shah Waliullah, he has this book where it's really beautiful. He talks about philosophy of Islam. So the reasoning behind everything also. It's a very advanced book. It's called Hujjatullah al-Baligha. So he talks about, okay, what's the purpose of wudu? He'll actually talk about the rationale. And he even talks about the purpose of salah. Like, we do salah because you have to. We're slaves. But he goes into what is the benefit and fruit you can get from salah by doing it. Every act of worship in Islam has some type of purpose behind it. It does something for the spirit. And also we owe it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said salah creates pure humility in the person. We come with so much arrogance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates this ruh of ours and infuses it in our bodies. And as we grow, we also grow in arrogance. Naturally, everyone, as a baby is attached to their mother or their father or whatever. They're very weak, and because of that, they're humble. A baby's humble and is always asking to be picked up. So you have to pick up the baby. It's humble. It understands that it's weak. But as the baby grows and it gains strength, it gets a little bit more arrogant. It doesn't need to be picked up anymore. It doesn't want to be picked up. Like, if my dad picked me up, I would be like, please put me down. I don't like this. This is a type of arrogance that I've developed. And there's a level of ignorance. So you admit to your ignorance when you're young. You ask the teacher, I don't know. I'm sitting here because you know. But there comes a time where now I feel arrogant. I should be able to know, so I don't want to ask anymore. And there comes a time, as we grow every stage of our lives, we increase. As we increase, in whatever facet, we also increase in our arrogance. So this is a very dangerous disease, a spiritual disease that's worse than physical diseases. And it's, proof that it's the worst of diseases, arrogance. It's the first sin, Iblis, the first sin that we have in the Quran. Before even Adam alayhi salam, Iblis, he's guilty of arrogance. And that one disease has prevented him from going to Jannah. He knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he knows how to do ibadah, he has more knowledge than any of us, but he's not going to go to Jannah because of the arrogance. So as we develop, we gain more and more arrogance. So a Muslim is given the beauty of salah because 5 times a day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that this thing can destroy our spirituality. He makes us bow before Allah to remove that arrogance. Then throughout that time period between Fajr and Dhuhr, a little bit more arrogance comes. When it's time for Dhuhr, we have to realize that we're humble before Allah, and then that arrogance that was developed is removed. 5 times a day, we're removing the arrogance that we develop. And this is not an easy thing because arrogance is very tough. It's like a boulder, and we're slowly chipping away at it. Every ruku', every sujood, every standing in humility before Allah is a small chip out of that rock. Our problem, however, is we can be putting our head on the floor and not feel humility at all. And that's what's happening. Because you become habitual of salah, you don't feel anything. And if I don't realize that I'm supposed to be bowing my head before Allah, that right now, imagine if there was a human being and you were forced to put your head down before them, you would probably start crying. Because this is the most humiliating thing that I've ever experienced in my life. If your boss tells you, you will lose everything and you'll be kicked out of your home if you don't put your head right down on the floor before me. And if someone held your head down and forced you to do that, I'm pretty sure everyone would be infuriated and something would be happening in their heart. You'd feel horrible. We do this before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing happens. It's not that I'm content that He is my Rabb and that's why nothing's happening. It's because I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after the salah, or what am I going to eat, or what I ate. Everything but the purpose of salah. So in this one statement lies the key to Islam itself. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. I've spent a little bit of time on this, inshallah. Tomorrow I'll speak about what Imam Ibn Kathir himself is going to say, inshallah. So we'll pause here. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the haqiqah and reality of servanthood and ubudiyah, and the reality of this verse. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Question came during Salah, any part of the satr gets exposed? It's not happening in wudu, and also does it invalidate Salah?
So if the satar is exposed in salah for the period of the smallest rukan or fard of salah. Satar is the amount of the body that must be covered. So for a male, that is going to be, according to different madhahib, but if you want to encompass all the opinions, including the navel and including the entire knee. So the entire knee must be covered, the entire navel must be covered. In this way, we join different madhahib. Because a Hanafi, front and back. So even like some people wear short shirts, t-shirts, males wear t-shirts. And it's very short. So then when they go to ruku', then the entire back becomes exposed. So where your navel is, that space in the back is also part of the satar or private part. We live in a culture where the word private part only means what we call satar ghalidh, meaning the absolute private part. But in Islam, private part is larger than that. So if the satar, or from the navel to the knee, anywhere from the front or back, all of that is exposed for the period of 3 subhanallah, subhana rabbiyal a'la or subhana rabbiyal azim, 3 times, the salah is invalidated. The salah won't count anymore. So people who wear t-shirts and things like that, they should be very careful, because when you're in ruku', subhana rabbiyal azim 3 times, if that lower back is exposed in that duration, the salah will not be counting anymore. If it's less than that, it's sinful, but it will be forgiven. But it shouldn't equate that much time. So it must be covered for that duration, yes?
Is that throughout the whole salah, 3 seconds, or 3 seconds every time it's
I believe it's 3 seconds for every posture. So like
the second part,
the wudu will not break due to the satar. If the satar is exposed, the private area is exposed, the wudu does not break. It'll remain intact, but it will damage the salah. Also, it's against the etiquette of salah to wear what's called in fiqh books thiyabul bidla, or work clothing. They title it as work clothing. But what they mean by that is everyday clothes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. Beautify yourself every time, and scholars state that masjid here doesn't mean the house of Allah. It means every time you perform salah, you must beautify yourself. So if we go to an interview, you will wear a suit and you will wear a very beautiful thing. Maybe you buy a silk tie, even though it's haram, you can go ahead and wear it for your interview. But for salah, we wear just a t-shirt that, we've been wearing for going to sleep, and PJs and all of this. So this is, again, against the etiquette of standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wants you to wear the most beautiful clothes you have. And that is why I would consider it as a true ikhlas Or if a person's praying by themselves and then they wear very good clothing on top of it, you wear imama and everything, and no one watches you but Allah, that would be an act of ikhlas, inshallah, because who else is going to see you? But it's the opposite. When we come to a public gathering, we wear very beautiful clothing, and then when we're praying in our rooms and no one's watching, you got like a tank top and then what do you call those, capris, and a tank top barely covering the satar. So that's unfortunate. Was there any other question? Okay. So it doesn't break the wudu, and it will invalidate the salah if it is exposed, and we shouldn't do that, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq, and everything comes back to our reverence of Allah. If we revere Allah, everything falls in place. If that's not there, then it's just like get it over with, and I'm not going to change my clothes, and I got other stuff to do. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Inshallah, after the remaining salah, we'll have our Arba'in program. A lot of love. Well, I can leave this. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم أما بعد. So last time we were talking about different levels of piety. We talked about 4 different levels of piety. Now Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he's saying he wants to add some more things onto this whole concept of seeking halal. So the reason why we talked about levels of piety is because these are the levels that we need to understand exist and try to attempt to achieve them in our dealings with earning halal and consumption basically. Now he says, Na'am ينبغي أن تضيف إليه شيئين. You should add 2 more points to what our discussion so far. So with that discussion of levels of piety, 2 more things he wants to discuss. أحدهما أن تحذر عن مواقع غرورهم ولا تلتفت إلى قولهم من وهب في آخر السنة ماله زوجته واستوهب منها مالها سقطت الزكاة عنهما. He says, be cautious from deception. Be aware of deception. And what deception is he talking about? Rationalizing. This is something the mind does. Sometimes you find something that's impermissible or doubtful. And what we'll do is we start seeking and researching about it, not to really learn about it because we already have a doubt or we already have someone who said that this is impermissible. We start researching so that we may find a way to make it halal. This is rationalizing. And this is basically the opposite of what he's asking us to do. So for an example, you ask a scholar, is this thing permissible? Is seafood permissible? Crabs, octopi, etc. He says, no, you shouldn't eat octopus, you shouldn't eat squid. It's not permissible. So you say, wow, but I love seafood. And, me and my friends, we go out and have sushi all the time. And, I can't survive without oysters, etc. So then you start going online. And this is, I guess, Muslim Urban Dictionary will call it fatwa shopping. Right? Fatwa shopping. So you go on these various websites, you type in, is seafood halal? So some fatwas you're finding say, no, it's not. But others are saying it is. So you say, well, there's a difference of opinion, so, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would always choose the easier route, so I'm going to take the easier route. Little do you know that this is going to land you in some trouble. It's more nuanced than this, and the reason the scholar didn't tell you all the details is he gave you the summary. Right? There's a lot more to it. So he's saying avoid this kind of mentality where you want to make something halal. When you know and inside your heart you do believe that what that person is saying is correct. And he gives a better example here. He says, for instance, and this is true, he says, don't be beguiled by this statement that some people say for zakat. At the end of the year, right before you have to give your zakat, right? You have a certain date, you wait for that date to occur again 1 year later, and then you have to discharge your zakat. Right before your date, your due date, for instance, everyone has a different one. You hear from a person that if I give all of my wealth to my wife at that moment, the day before my zakat is due. For instance, it's like your taxes, right? The day before taxes are due, you gift everything to your wife. So now you don't own anything. Then your zakat date comes and you have zero in the bank account. You have absolutely nothing. You're a faqir. You can actually take zakat. You have nothing. So you don't have to pay zakat anymore. The next day, your zakat date is over. So you tell your wife, I would like my gift back. And she gives it back to you. Now you've evaded zakat. This is actually in the books of fiqh a way for a person not to pay zakat. Scholars of fiqh would say he doesn't have to give zakat. Technically, he doesn't have to give zakat. Actually, is not wajib on him. So this is a loophole. And so he's talking about this. You've found a way. It's not haram at all, but he'll talk about it more deeper. The maqsid behind it is bad. But if you ask a mufti, like, did I do anything wrong? Like, technically, you don't have to pay zakat. This is what people do with their taxes, right? You hire a good lawyer. They'll find ways that, you can evade the taxes, put it in that thing here, move your money around, and then you don't have to pay any taxes. The rich do that. So can you do this with zakat? So he says, beware of this type of attitude where you're playing games with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فإنهم إن عنوا به أن السلطان لا يطالبهما بالزكاة لأن مطمح نظره ظاهر الملك فهو صدق. If what they mean by this statement, like, you can give your money to your wife and have her gift it back to you after your zakat date, you don't have to give zakat. If they're talking about the king here, like, according to the king of that time, if it's a Muslim king and he collects people's zakat, in terms of the legal status, you actually don't have to pay zakat. It's right. This is actually a true thing. It's written in the books of fiqh, but you're not allowed to do it. You're playing a game with Allah, he's going to mention. But he says then it's truthful. If that's your goal, to evade the king, then you've done a good job. You've evaded the king. And then he goes on a tangent, but he'll come to the answer later on, that you can't evade Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَدَرَجَةُ الْفُقَهَاءِ وَفَتْوَاهُمْ ذِكْرُ مَا يَتَعَلَّقُ بِالظَّوَاهِرِ. The fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh. So if you go to a mufti, you go to a scholar of fiqh, their whole field of study and their subject matter is the apparent. They're looking at like the bare bones rules. In the books of fiqh, after one whole year, if whatever money you have on that date, you must give zakat. If you have nothing on that date, then there's no zakat. That's just the ruling. It's in all the fiqh books. That's how it works. So that's how a mufti works. He's just going to tell you the bare bones ruling. Now, if you want more, you want guidance, then you ask him, well, what is the best thing I should do? And that's why many imams, they have this thing where they say, one of our teachers, he would say, I don't like it when people ask me rulings. I like it when people ask me, what should I do? What's good for my iman? Then that's another answer. Right? A mufti will just give you like, okay, is this halal? Yes, it's halal. But is it good for you? Ask that as well. So he's saying a mufti will only do that. That's what a faqih does. فَيَحْكُمُونَ بِالْبَرَاءَةِ عَنِ الزَّكَاةِ إِذَا سَقَطَ طَلَبُ السَّاعِي. So he'll say you don't have to give zakah when the government doesn't seek it from you. And on your zakat date, if you have zero in the bank account, they will not seek zakat from you. That's akin to like our taxes. If you put your stuff in someone else's account, you don't have to pay taxes. Technically you don't have anything, but it's actually yours. ويحكمون بصحة الصلاة إذا امتنع القتل على السلطان بجريان سورة الصلاة. And the fuqaha, they'll say, when does your salah count? They will say that your salah counts when you physically do the actions. Faqih, he'll say, you can ask a mufti, hey, can you see if my salah is right? He'll look at you and he'll say, okay, you're doing ruku' nicely, sujood, 2 rak'ahs. Okay, what did you recite here? You recited probably, okay, your salah is right. What else can he do? Can you open up your chest and look at the condition of your heart? He can't do that. So the most he can do is say that, okay, this apparent figure of salah that you've done is correct. And he's also saying, like, in this situation, if you're performing salah like that, a Muslim king cannot harm you. Meaning a Muslim king will actually punish a person if they're not performing salah. You can imprison people. There's even a death penalty for someone who refuses salah. There's conditions and stuff like that, but in an Islamic state, if someone says, I will never pray salah, you can actually subject them to a death penalty for that, for salah. Because if a person rejects salah, then they're not a Muslim. So these are Islamic hudud laws, capital punishment in an Islamic state. But anyway, that's what he's talking about here. This obviously cannot be applied in a non-Islamic state. إذ ليس بأيديهم من القوانين إلا القانون الذي يستعمله السلطان في السياسة. The fuqaha only look at what a king would use in his Islamic state, like the rulings. So they can't go beyond that. They can't see the spiritual side. لينتظم أمر المعيشة الدنيوية التي هي منزل من منازل الطريق كما سبق. The reason they do this is for the dunya's sake, so that everything can run smoothly. So if you, on your zakat due date, you don't have any money, then you don't have to give zakat. This is the rules so that the dunya can work. There's limitations to these dunyawi rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put on us. There's limitations to it, because you and I cannot see the true intention behind a person. So we need these rules to, make the dunya run properly. Now, he comes to the actual purpose behind the ibadah. So he said in the beginning that if your purpose is to evade the sultan and the king, then bismillah, go ahead, you're doing a good job. You evaded him. But is that really what you're doing here? وأما أنت إذا كنت تنظر إلى ما ينفعك غدا عند جبار الجبابرة وسلطان السلاطين فلا تلتفت إلى هذا. However, if your purpose in doing the salah, giving the zakah, is that you'll have something that will benefit you tomorrow in front of the King of Kings and the greatest, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that's your purpose, then none of this is going to benefit. You evading that zakah, giving it to your wife, and then the next day taking it back, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish you as if you had to pay the zakah, because you're trying to fool Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here. If you stand and perform your salah and you're not even thinking about Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about munafiqeen in the Quran. He says, وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. In their salah they stand, but they don't remember Allah except for very rarely. A munafiq, when he stands and he performs salah with everyone, maybe like 1% is for Allah. Like he remembered Allah in that 1%. That's only because the Imam is saying Allahu Akbar, so he has to hear those words, Allah. In that brief moment, he remembers Allah. Other than that, the munafiq, he doesn't care. He's thinking about how to run his business or what he's going to do later on. He's just standing there so people will think he's a Muslim. So he's saying this is not going to benefit. The way you and I are performing salah is not going to benefit in front of Allah. It's possible we're doing Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and on Yawm al-Qiyamah it didn't count. A faqih, when he's watching us, a mufti, when he's watching us, he'll say, yeah, that's a salah right there. Look how long he's in the sujood, but you don't know what he's thinking about. Where is his heart? Where is his focus? And on Yawm al-Qiyamah, there's a certain threshold of acceptance. If our focus was not reaching that amount, we don't know exactly where that is, but that's according to Allah, that there's a threshold. If you don't meet that salah doesn't even count. it's useless. So he's saying that don't don't appease yourself by saying that I'm doing 5 times salah. Are you really though? Are you getting the purpose of salah, which is humility before Allah? Are you doing the purpose of zakah? He's going to talk about that right here. So let's see. How much more should I go? What do you guys think? 5 more minutes? 5 more minutes?
So you go to 45 if you like.
Okay. I'll do 5 more minutes, inshallah. I don't know how long I've been going. We didn't do much, but khair. Hopefully it's beneficial. So he says, وَعَلَمْ أَنَّ مَقْصُودَ الزَّكَاةِ إِزَالَةُ رَذِيلَةِ الْبُخْلِ. Now he goes into the mindset that we should have. When you're engaging in the zakah, what are you actually doing? Remember, like I mentioned before, each act of worship is actually beneficial to us. There's a double benefit. One is you are fulfilling your duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a great thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I mean, that's enough for us. You perform salah for that reason alone. You're thankful to Allah, or because you're a slave of Allah, you do it. No questions asked. But beyond that, as an act of mercy and loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us benefits as well. So every act of worship in Islam actually has some kind of benefit, a spiritual benefit. Like I mentioned earlier, before or after the salah, salah has the benefit of destroying the arrogance. There are like major spiritual maladies that everyone gets. Salah deals with arrogance. He's going to talk about what is the spiritual purpose of zakah. Beyond, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. That's the real reason. He says, أَنَّ مَقْصُودَ الزَّكَاةِ إِزَالَةُ رَذِيلَةِ الْبُخْلِ. The real purpose behind zakah is to remove miserliness, to remove greed. So we have a spiritual disease that has started growing ever since we understood ownership. That is when we're babies. We understand this is my toy, not your toy, and so we can see greed within babies as well. That keeps on growing. Just like arrogance grows as we develop, greed also grows as we develop. These are very dangerous diseases. And many scholars of spirituality talk about the comparison between a spiritual disease and a physical malady, and the spiritual one is more harmful. So consider this a cancer. Cancer is horrible, and you have to go through a lot to get rid of that. You have to go through chemotherapy, and that literally destroys the body. And it's like a race. Which one survives, the cancer or you? Either the cancer dies and you survive, or you die and cancer also dies with you. There's no other option. So now when we have these, scholars state that for you as a whole, this spiritual disease is worse because it will last in the akhirah as well. If you had cancer and you died from cancer, all your sins go away with that as well. You wake up in the Yawm al-Qiyamah without any sin because of the sabr that you went through. But if you die and you have bukhl, you have greed, you have miserliness, you have arrogance, that will last in the dunya. You won't have a happy life. Allah is not going to give it to you. And when you come out of your grave, it's going to be even worse on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So he says the purpose of zakah is the removal of greed. فَإِنَّهُ مُهْلِكٌ. It will destroy you in dunya and akhirah. You won't have a happy life because you're greedy. And in the akhirah is going to be even worse. كما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاث مهلكات. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says 3 things are destructive. شح مطاع وهوى متبع وإعجاب المرء بنفسه. And the hadith keeps going. So he says 3 things are extremely dangerous. Number 1, greed that is obeyed. So we all have greed, but some of us have learned how to disobey that. Alhamdulillah, that's great. There's no human that doesn't have greed. It's part of who you are. You need it to defend yourself. So if you completely obey the greed, that's the harm. It's not harmful to have greed and disobey it. That's the first thing. Greed that is obeyed. Number 2, وَهَوًا مُتَّبَعٌ. Desires that are followed. It's normal to have desires. Otherwise you'd be a robot. But when you follow those haram desires, that's the thing that will destroy you. And number 3, إِعْجَابُ الْمَرْءِ بِنَفْسِهِ. When a person is conceited and loving themselves. They start loving themselves, thinking they're above everyone else. Arrogance. So he says 3 things are destructive. That is essentially greed, following all of your desires, meaning instant gratification, and loving the self. These are muhlikat. I'm gonna extend a little bit so I can do one more paragraph inshallah, because I want to finish the idea. He says, وَهِبَةُ مَالِ الزَّكَاةِ لِأَجْلِ دَرْءِ الزَّكَاةِ تَجْعَلُ الشُّحَّ مُطَاعًا. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam just said in this hadith, following your greed will destroy you. And gifting your zakat money, all of your money to your wife, so you don't have to pay zakat, you have now obeyed your greed. You wanted that money, you didn't want to give just 2.5%, you couldn't give, so you gifted everything to your wife, you just obeyed the greed, now you destroyed yourself. فإنه يصير مطاعا بإجابته إلى ما يقتضي. That greed that you had, you have now obeyed it by doing that action. Before you did that action, you didn't obey the greed because you have the money, the greed is there. Look, if there was a way I could avoid the zakat, I would love to do so. That everyone has that greed. You see, alhamdulillah, you're making a lot of money and you see the 2.5%, it's like, wow, $10,000, that's 2.5. I don't know if I can give that. The thought will come. It's natural. That's not what's bad. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that's natural. The bad part is that you actually obey it. Now you give it all to your wife. Now you did obedience to that greed. So وَقَبْلَ هَذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مُطَاعًا. Before that you had the greed but you didn't obey it. That's fine. You actually get a reward for it. You had the greed yet you still gave the zakat. You get the reward for zakat and you get the reward for disobeying the nafs. فَكَيْفُ يَكُونُ ذَلِكَ مُنْجِيًا. So that's where we'll stop. He says, how in the world will this save you on Yawm al-Qiyamah? This is what we need. We need our ibadah should save us on Yawm al-Qiyamah. This type of playing around with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, loopholing and this, you can fool the government, you can fool the king, you can fool everyone. There's no way you can fool Allah. He knows what you're going to do before you do it. So he says, there's no way this is going to benefit you. So he says, add this on to what we've been talking about, seeking halal. Don't start following loopholes. Yes, there are loopholes. The Hanafis are known for their logical thinking. So they write books on loopholes sometimes. There's funny loopholes. There's this, I'll finish with this. There's a thing called shufa. I think they have this law also in America, like actual government law. If you're selling your house and you didn't tell your neighbor, you're selling it to some other person, your neighbor has more right over you buying your house than that other person. So let's say you're selling your house $1 million. Your neighbor is like, well, why didn't you tell me? I would have bought it. I would love to buy the house. It's right next to mine. I would love to buy it. So he has a right. He can override your selling to another person. He can buy it for the same price.
We have that clause here. It's known as right of first refusal.
Yeah,
So
I heard of
for
that.
this- For this, the side, that space.
So they have to
Yeah.
go through us first
Yeah,
and
yeah,
request
first
us, right?
refusal for that.
Yeah.
It's in our contract.
Yeah, so it's called Haqqu Shufa in the Islamic fiqh. We actually have a chapter of this called Shufa in Buyu', etc. Alhamdulillah, you'll be very interested to see the overlap in a lot of ahkam. Because we usually focus on ibadah, but there's the business side of Islam is really unique. So now, I'm just talking about a loophole here. So you're going to sell your house, $1 million, but you don't like your neighbor. I don't like this guy. I like my house, and I like the guy I'm selling it to. He's my cousin. I know he's going to take care of my house, and my neighbor, he's just going to break down my house that I built with my own hands. I don't want to sell it to this guy. But now I have to. The right of first refusal comes in. So what do Hanafi scholars say? Now Haqqu Shufa works, the right of first refusal, is whatever the neighbor is attached to. So if he's attached to your house, very nearby, where his land ends and yours start, he has that right. Or maybe he's like, there's other clauses as well, but this is one of them. So for instance, you decide how to make a loophole out of this. I'm selling a yard's amount that connects my land to your land for $1 million. You go to your neighbor, you want to buy it? He's like, no. And you tell your cousin that this is for sale, and you basically say that if you buy this, then I'll sell my land, the rest of the land for you for like $1 if you buy it. Now he only has Haqqu Shufa in that strip. he can't buy the other one because he's not connected to it. So it's a loophole. So he won't be able to get it. So you sell to your cousin for $1 million, and then you sell the rest for $1. But the neighbor won't have that. Or he could buy the strip for $1 million, and then he'll say, okay, I want the house, and you're like, it's not for sale. Have fun with your strip of land, right? So it's a loophole, and there's many other loopholes and stuff like that in fiqh. But like I mentioned, this is because human laws are limited, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly what's happening. So He knows when people are messing around. And I don't want to go too deep into it. There's halal loopholes, and there's haram loopholes. There are halal loopholes, and one was done by Ayyub alayhi salam in the Quran. Is a halal loophole that Allah taught him. But when we get to that surah one day in the future, we'll talk about it. So not all loopholes are bad. So people blame the Hanafis for this, but they're hypothetically presenting. Sometimes they show you this for the halal reasons. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq and give us a realization that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us, and we cannot fool anyone but ourselves. And we seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Still on or still here?
It's on. It's
Okay.
just, I didn't post the link.
Oh, that's okay.
Very smart of me. Sorry, I'm just constantly failing.